I have finally finished the Oathsworn campaign. It's time to now give it an official review after years ago we got the chance to preview this game. Back then, we fell in love with this. The question is, after going through 21 scenarios, do we still find the same joy from this game? The only way to find out will be to dive into Deepwood and see whether we find treasures or just another large campaign behemoth. For those who don't know, Oathsworn in the Deepwood is a cooperative campaign game for 1 to 4 players. In this game, you will take on the role of a free company, a group of heroes who have been tasked with saving and defending what remains of civilization. Most of what they know has either been killed, swallowed, and or destroyed in some way by the Deepwood, a strange and very dangerous forest which you will learn more about as the game progresses. Now, you will play as these heroes over 21, arguably 22 chapters, with most of these chapters being able to be broke up into a story and event phase. The story phase is basically when you're going to explore, learn what's going on, usually trying to find out more about the event that's going to occur in that chapter, as well as gearing up for it. The event is code for combat. This will be when you'll do your fighting, usually against a large, imposing, and very scary mini. I will be going over the story phase and then the encounter phase, so keep in mind, I will be showing off components. I believe for the most part, this should be relatively spoiler free, so you shouldn't have to worry too much, but just a disclaimer beforehand. Now, let's actually start off with what the chapters start with, the story mode. Each chapter is broken up into a story part and an encounter part. The story part is explaining what's going on in the world and helping you set yourself up for the encounter. Now, depending on what's happening in the story and what chapter you're on, they can actually start off very differently. So you'll have to look at the storybook or use the app to find out how you should set up your game. That being said, many of them will have a map of a city similar to this with different number locations on them. If they tell you to put out a number pog matching a location, that means it will be a location you can visit. Whenever you choose to visit a location, you will take that token and add it to your time board here. The time board represents how long you are taking in order to complete certain objectives, and depending on the chapter time board, there may be certain events or rewards that trigger should you cover or finish before you cover them and enter the encounter. One of the more obvious ones will be an encounter deck. There's one for the city and the Deepwood, depending on where you are. These start off with some basic ones, but depending on how the story goes, you may add some extra cards in there, matching the decisions you've made along the way. Now, along the way, you may be asked to make an important decision, which usually sounds like a fork in the road. It'll be something along the lines of, you can either go and deal with the task the noble has given you, or you can go deal with the strange occurrences you just heard about. This will often give you a card that says Path A or Path B, which changes what you read in the book. So if you go to location 16 and you're on a path, flip it over, it'll tell you, depending on your path, what number you should go to. Still putting it on the track and following all the rules of placing tokens there. Two of the major things you need to know about are gear and the apothecary. Gear is bought at the banksmith. Each chapter has its own gear deck of different gear you can acquire. This is used to equip your character with plenty of fun tools. The apothecary allows you to buy curatives. We'll go more about those when we talk about injuries in the encounter phase. While you play throughout the story mode, the important thing, regardless of what kind of story mode you're playing, is you will come across checks. This is a core mechanic for not only the story mode, but the combat in the encounter as well. Checks are how you see your character passes or fails different actions, such as searching for loot or seeing if you get ambushed. The way checks work is they will say, do a search for, and 4 is the number you need to meet or beat. To do so, you will use these cards over here, or dice in the same colors. Now, the dice have the same ratio as a full deck of cards. For the most part, I am going to be talking using the cards, but keep in mind that you can replace drawing cards with rolling dice of the equivalent color. Now, for any check, you always get to draw up to 10 of the white cards. There are 4 different colors, white being the weakest, black being the strongest. Now, the reason why you would not want to just draw a full 10 for a check, even for the 4, is because you might fail. Before you draw, you have to say how many you're going to draw. So going back to the previous example of a search for, let's say we're going to draw 4. If we were to draw and we receive 2 blanks, that means it's an auto fail. So regardless of what else we drew, and even if we hit or pass 4, 2 blanks means it fails. Now, let's say we did not draw that blank, and we kept going, and we got this unique symbol here. What this means is not only is it adding 2, currently we have 5, so we'd already beat it, but this is a critical hit, meaning you draw another card. If it's another critical hit, you keep going. The great thing is, if you draw a blank for a critical hit, it does not count towards the 2. So in this case of a search 4, we've definitely passed with a 7. All cards drawn this way are then discarded, meaning you now know that the white deck is now missing 2 critical hits as well as some blanks. This is when you might want to switch over to the dice or use any of the powers or tokens you earn along the way to manipulate your rolls in order to make sure you have better odds in passing, or when we get to combat, hitting for more damage. You may also get moments when you have a specific option, bonus, or penalty for some checks if you have a specific Oathsworn or ally among your team. Allies are mostly going to be used during combat, but think of them as important people that are tagging along with you. Now, how the story section ends is really dependent on what's happening there. You might not always have a map like this. It could be something where you're racing the clock really quickly or just exploring, and depending on what you do, you may end it earlier. So you're really going to have to play the game to find out what you're supposed to do in order to move into the encounter phase. That being said, even though these choices on the paths may seem very different, they still will lead to the same encounter. All that's different is maybe the flavor and some of the options you may come across, such as finding specific gear or to learn some information about the fight you're going to come across in the next encounter. One final thing, if all of this seems too much and you're just here for the combat, the encounter setup book actually has something called the quick action page. For each chapter, you can pretty much look at how you can go through the story very fast just to quickly gear up, find out what's going on in a much shorter period. Pretty much if you just want to keep skipping the cutscenes. We have now entered the encounter phase of this game, where you will take on usually a very large, scary miniature and try to defeat it before it wipes out all the Oathsworn. Now, you will follow the rules in the encounter book on how to set this up. Almost all combat will have your Oathsworn, of course, some obstacles, and whatever your enemy is, usually a very big scary mini, and possibly some minions that are serving under its thrall. Now, there are 4 steps to the encounter, which you could probably guess if you've ever played any kind of miniature combat game. There's refresh, your phase, the enemy phase, and then end of round phase. Here an example board for the Oathsworn. This tells you what gear they can equip, a special ability they have, and up here are their stats, which for the most part will shift depending on your gear. Your health is mostly determined by the difficulty level you're playing as, though keep in mind throughout the story mode, you may be taking some damage. Obviously, you hit 0, your guy is knocked out, or on the harder difficulties, killed. Your defense is based on all the gear you have in your hand with a shield symbol. So right now he has a 3, it can go higher, but we'll explain how defense works when we explain dealing damage. Might is based on the gear you have. So if you have this one two-handed weapon with the yellow cube, you put 1 yellow. If you had 2 two-handed weapons with different cubes, you put more cubes there. That determines when you attack how many other cards you're allowed to draw in addition to the free 10 ones. So right now the Ursa Bear at a level 1, this is a very early setup, is going to draw 1 yellow card in addition to whatever he wants from the white deck. Now, usually first is the refresh phase. However, I think it would be better for me to explain everything an Oathsworn can do first in order to explain then how the refresh phase works correctly. On your turn, you get the option to take an action, almost usually playing cards from your hand. This will include any equipment you have, as well as your starting abilities and more you may unlock as you level up. When you play a card, so let's say I choose Feral Blow, they may have options with these little animus symbols on them. If I want to do the attack, I may have to spend 3 animus. Then I have to put it in the cooldown section on the board. There's 0, 1, 2, 3. This one actually is a 0. Now, the next time I play a 3, any cards in that section get moved to the next number down. So that doesn't trigger those, but it means there are more cards now in the 2 section. This is called battle flow. This is actually as you migrate cards to the 0 spot, which is where you're going to get those cards back during refresh. Keep in mind though that if you use an item card, that does not trigger battle flow. So that might be a way to help stack up some more cards, but won't help you move them along the way. Oathsworn will move clockwise taking turns. That being said, they can pass, and if they pass and it comes back around to them, they can go. They're not ending all their actions for that round. Now, before we get to the enemy phase, let's actually talk about refresh again. The animus is your main way you play these cards, as I mentioned earlier. At the start of each refresh phase, you will refresh a specific number. So right now, I have a flat 6, but as the game progresses, you can increase that number. In addition, anything in your 0 cooldown zone goes back into your hand. So that battle flow I mentioned before, if you're able to move these all the way over here, next time in refresh, I would get quite a bit of cards back to my hand, giving me more options. Now it's time that I think we talked about the big bag enemy. Now I have an image up first just to show what the enemy cards look like and to blur out the abilities of the enemy, because I'm sorry I'm not giving you an advantage just for watching this video. The top one is mostly a very pretty picture that is where you keep track of their health. The bottom is where all their stats are. They'll have some special abilities, they may have some stats for minions if they use them, as well as a defense and might value. You may get access to the special ability board early on, allowing you to see what kind of abilities and powers they have, which means you can gear up correctly for that fight. Now, removing that image and just showing off the top board, which isn't really spoilery, this is what the enemy is going to look like. This is how you keep track of their health. It usually, for the most part, will represent different parts. Now, depending on where you're attacking the model, whether it be from the front, which is marked with a little arrow there, I don't know if you can see it that well, you are going to be damaging that section of the body. So if you hit from the front, that's going to deal some damage. Hit from the back, you'll hit over there, so on and so forth. You will want to reduce all these dice to 0 in order to actually kill it. Now, the enemy will attack using this deck. This deck is broken up into different sections, which I'll explain why that matters in a little bit. But what you need to know is these cards will say what it does, how it hunts, and sometimes it will show one of these symbols. If you have broken that symbol, it means that attack will be weaker. Keep in mind that the top card of this deck, for the most part, is going to be face up, so you will actually know what's coming, as your Oathsworn are, well, they're trained. They know quite a bit about the Deepwood and the terrors that lurk in there. Now, the way enemies will attack you is they'll use the might that I showed earlier. So, for example, this guy had 2 reds and 3 yellows. In terms of the deck of cards, the enemies have their own deck of cards, so you don't have to worry if they take all of your critical hits, nor can you take advantage of taking out all the good cards from your side and making them draw a bunch of blanks. You can use dice from them, by the way, but they suggest you use the cards for a more consistent experience. Now, regardless of dice or cards, they will flip over that many, but an enemy never misses. So even if they roll 2 blanks, they will still hit. But they also don't crit. So in this case, it is a total damage of 10. And now it's the time I think I should talk about how damage is dealt. Regardless of who is dealing the damage, the way it works is you add up the damage, if it hits, then you will divide it by the defense value of the target. If we use the Ursa Bear's flat resistance from before, that's going to be 10 divided by 3, and you will round down, meaning the bear is going to take 3 damage. That is half of a character's life, even on the easiest modes. Many of your ability cards may have defense values. You can discard them instead, putting them in the same cooldown section, to add that defense to your base defense, in order to try to reduce the damage you're going to take. Now, you are going to do your best to remove all the health from this enemy and take it out. If that were to happen to your Oathsworn, they become knocked out, or in the harder modes, killed. In that case, you are going to replace yourself with an ally. You use one of these generic minis, and you'll get some combat allies throughout the way. You start with some basic ones. If they get knocked out, they just die. You discard them, you archive them, and you don't have access to them again. If everyone gets knocked out and replaced with allies, that does count as a loss for the encounter. Finishing the encounter will have you read an epilogue, as well as gain some new fun gear and leveling up. First off you're going to do is that level up. There is a chart in the book which tells you what you gain depending on your level. In addition, you're going to get some new items from the next chapter's selection, an easy way to power up, as well as having the option of getting some unique ones specific to the boss you're fighting. You will always get 2. You can possibly get more depending on what you did in the story mode, as well as the difficulty. Finally, there are loss of items. Remember the 2 items I showed before for our character? Well, every item that you use, so in this case, those are the only 2 he was using, you must destroy 1 or 2 if you were knocked out. That is one of the reasons why you're going to get more items from future chapters to replace what breaks. So yes, it stinks that you're going to be losing gear, but odds are if you play your cards wisely and don't use all your best gear at once, you should still be able to be well equipped for future encounters. Unfortunately, there's one final penalty for being knocked out, assuming you're not playing on the harder modes where you kill off a character. There is the injury deck. You will draw cards from here, which usually are very negative. They are added to your hand, and more often than not, you'll have to play them before other cards during battle. However, remember the apothecary I brought up? If you bought any curatives, these are pretty much blanks in the injury deck that you shuffle in, and if you draw those, you can use those to just say you dodged a bullet or it didn't really do that much harm. Now, the final thing I want to talk about is cleanup, setup, because to me, this game does an amazing job at it without you having to provide extra baggies. They tell you right off the bat how to put cards away in these little bins. Each character, as well as the group as a whole, has its own little baggie for you to use. So you can, whatever gear you have, when you want to save, you throw it in there, making it very easy to you to find your character's possessions. And as well as the token trays, the cards. This is not going to be a hard game to know what goes where. This may seem like a little extra, but for the most part, other games rely on third-party companies to make inserts. It feels like they listen to all the issues that happen in a lot of campaign games, especially, just like this game that has a lot of moving parts, cards, dice, and they tried to make it as easy as possible to go in and out so you can actually play the game. That is going to be an idea that resonates throughout this entire game as well as this review. But let's actually now talk about the game itself. Let's start off with the story, where I do think has some of its biggest strengths and weaknesses. So this story will progress over 21, 22 chapters, sort of. I keep doing that iffy. You'll understand when you play it. It's nothing like a big surprise. And that is part of the biggest weaknesses, actually, I'd say, is when using the phrase not biggest surprise. There are some cool story twists and turns, but throughout the game, if you recall, I mentioned that path A or B. So you're thinking, you're making choices. For example, you can decide to listen to the noble and follow his instructions and help him out. Or maybe you hear about some complaints in the common, poorer area. You think that may change your outcome. You're choosing your virtuous path. It is more akin to what many people, at least in my head, when I hear talk about Telltale games, where regardless of what choice you make, you're still ending up at the same destination. You're still going to have that encounter with that boss. Depending on your choices, you're not going to fight off the King's Guard if you go against the royalty, or you're not going to fight off some rebels if you side with the monarchy. Things of that nature. It feels a little bit on rails because of that at first. If you feel like you're going to have a lot more options, even some of the minor checks you may make where you might all of a sudden have to do a search check because you feel like you're about to get ambushed, you may not get punished in terms of story-wise and just not get a specific reward, which may hurt you a little bit, but it's not going to cost you dearly or something. There are going to be some decisions that give you different gear or even allies, and that is going to be where it's more rewarding. I want to call them smaller choices, but an overarching change of narrative. Your characters are still good guys. This is not going to be Fallout New Vegas, where depending on what faction you side with and where you go, you can have completely different options. You don't have different missions to choose. Chapter 1 has Chapter 1 stuff. There's no Chapter 2 A and B. You're following much more of that narrative. It's more of a miss in the sense of if you don't have that in mind, you might feel a little robbed. But if you understand that's what the game's going for, it's not that bad. That said, I've seen to be going really negative with it. It's just because I'm now going to go into the highly positive and what the trade-offs are for that. Compared to a lot of huge open world games when you can make infinite choices, sometimes it may feel very hard for you to get specific character notes or even just get the right story across without making it feel too bland. Because they sort of set you on these specific paths, whether it's A or B, you're going to see what's happening in the world. You're going to find out. You can't ignore a plague that is occurring, and that's going to make things a lot more interesting. Those checks, sure, you're not going to get that, oh my God, I didn't see the enemy, so I took all this huge amount of damage. It's going to feel a bit more, all right, this stinks, or I can move on. It lets you feel like you can still be a part of the story, I guess, and that's where I like. And then when it came to that, the characters are allowed to work really well, even though it's not like this is a named character. This is still the Ursa warrior, but there are going to be times when you're going to be intimidating someone for whatever reason. And if you have that Ursa warrior, you're going to be rolling better because I mean, it's a giant bear. That's intimidating. Same thing goes for all the other ones, even some of the allies. If you saved someone or didn't save someone, that would may allow you to do a different option and check and get some new items. And to me, that is really rewarding if the story holds up. And to me, it did. It was fun. It's interesting. It's very, I guess grimdark is the word, but the characters don't feel that over depressing. They still seem to find hope, even though they get a lot of bad stuff thrown their way, as well as some decisions I would not want to be in charge of making. So it still feels like you are fighting to carve a place of little bit of happiness here, regardless of how evil and terrible the Deepwood is. That will also culminate near the end, where I will say there is a decision. You don't really get to see the consequences of that decision. It's more of an epilogue kind of thing, and they don't even give much. But it's the kind of one that, one, definitely leaves up to an Oathsworn 2. But two, it's one that I'm really curious what other people made. I made a choice. I don't think there's a right one. Maybe I'm way off on this and there is an obvious moral hierarchy kind of thing. But it's an interesting one for me nonetheless. So the story has all those options in terms of the actual story beats and stuff. Now, all of this may sound boring to you, especially since, as I said, everything's on the rails, which may be why you take that quick action version where you skip the story and go into combat. I highly recommend you don't do that, because mechanically, the story section was maybe where I liked things more than the combat. And I enjoy the combat when I get to that. The story section, I expected early on, because the first few are pretty similar, just walking around the map, getting tokens, maybe go to another city, getting tokens. But as soon as you start progressing more into the game, the story section's like, guess what? You're not in a city anymore. You're in this weird maze. Have fun there. Or guess what? You're in an escape room now. Get ready to solve a bunch of puzzles. It really feels like they didn't just want to make the game feel like I'm doing the same thing of reading, fighting, reading, fighting, reading, fighting. You're still doing reading, but it feels like there's so many more weird stuff going on. Some of them are perfect. I'll admit the first time I did the maze one, I had to actually sort of backtrack my steps, not like move my character, but I took both the app and the book because I was like, something's not working out. I made a mistake. It's on me. But the fact that they try out different things keeps the game fresh. I was not bored of the story mode once I hit near the end of the 20-ish chapters. I was still excited to see what was going on, not just because of what the actual story is, but in terms of the game I will be playing during the story mode. Because of that, I never felt the need to just quickly go through the reading section. I always was happy, even if I know I was ending up at the same encounter place, because I'm still playing a fun game while learning the story. Now, as for the combat, I actually previewed this before. We saw this a while ago before the first Kickstarter, and we couldn't say much about the story then. We saw some of it, we got to try it, but having the full experience now, which is why I want to talk to you about it, I could mention more about that. The combat, probably going to be my same opinion as it was then. I really like it. It's tight. I feel like I'm in control. The dice and the cards combined make it feel like I never have those moments when I feel like I just got ripped off because of luck. I can do a lot to manipulate it. Not enough to guarantee everything every time, but enough to get those moments where if I miss, it's like I did what I could in my power right now. Or when you get a bunch of crits, you still feel that same rush as when you roll a d20 and get that natural 20. It works really well. The enemies are really fun. Some of them are very mean in a good way. And because you can see what's coming up and you're rewarded from damaging different parts, so you may want to be like, okay, the rat keeps hitting us with a tail. That's got to be a strong point. Let's take that out. It feels like you are in control of so much in this game while having a relatively simple AI. The rats, they will target certain things. They'll tell you what they go for. There is a system of using north by west in order to target if there's equal targets. So it wasn't too hard to control them. And of course, playing through the story, getting hints about things in beforehand, knowing what to equip, and then being careful because you don't want to put all your best gear because you're going to have to destroy at least one, possibly two of those. You don't want to lose your two best weapons or armor. But maybe you read the gear and you're like, this guy, I got to go all out on this because depending on his abilities is the worst for my class. Speaking of which, there are 12 characters. They're really cool. This is a little bit of a miss For me, I don't know enough to put in the book. This is like a nitpicky thing. One of the characters is technically playable at level 1, but you're not supposed to get it until around halfway through the game, or that's when you're supposed to meet the character. Wait till then to probably use it, even though it was one that I wanted to play with. And I didn't find this out because I wanted to play with it. I was finding out because I wanted to know why I was encountering this character through the story mode. And then I finally found out why. And I was like, oh, that's weird. That should have been said during the character selection page. It's said in the books during the appendixes, but not during the initial character selection. I wish it said it there. So in the end, if you throw it all together, you got a story mode, which admittedly, it feels a little linear and has an illusion of choice problem, which could have been a little bit better. The world itself is really cool, very cool, grim, dark, but not too annoyingly dark, and mechanically really shook things up often enough that it never got stale for me. Then you throw in the combat, which feels so much in your control that for the most part, you feel you won or lost a combat because of the choices you made, not just because Lady Luck was with you or was off visiting someone else. Finally, throw in all the decisions of components and how they designed to make this game, whether it's not just for the storage options, but also you can change difficulty on the fly. You can skip the story mode if you don't want to do that. There are so many game decisions and game design decisions made to really feel like it's designed to try to look at every single problem in campaign games and fix them. Together, these elements make for a campaign game that feels it has huge complexity to it, while at the same time being almost one of the most accessible ones I can think of in a long time. This is a game that, for the most part, it's hard for me to try and think of where it has a huge flaw. Rather, it's more of those nitpicky things that, well, I don't really like this or that. The Oathsworn game is here to try and have you play through its campaign. It wants you to have fun. It wants you to actually play through the entire box, not just be a pretty big game on your shelf. Crits and misses for Oathsworn Into the Deepwood. Crits. The story mode doesn't just offer a fun world for you to interact with, but also switches up the mechanics depending on the chapter. This changes each chapter from feeling the same of you just walking around a city. Rather, depending on what's going on, you could really feel like you have to play a different game. Sometimes it is just that investigation, sometimes it's making your way through a maze, sometimes it'll be an escape room. This is really important as it'll keep things fresh and keep you engaged in the story mode, even if there is an option for you to sort of just skip it. Combat is designed in such a way so you never truly feel that it is out of your hands. There are plenty of ways for you to manipulate the cards or dice, as well as, of course, push your luck and maybe hope that you are able to get a bigger hit than usual. Likewise, the monsters all have fun and unique abilities, but you can see a lot of the monster's actions ahead of time, meaning that you won't feel that you are blindsided by how the monster reacts to you. Combine that with any tokens and of course the battle flow system, you will always feel up to the challenge for whatever the game has to throw at you. I know I tend to get excited by if a game is able to be stored very well, but the quality of life changes made in this game to me honestly set a bar that I would like to expect from any large game. The ability to switch your difficulty just as easy as it is in a video game, as well as having plenty of options to make your character easier to use or to skip the story mode if that's not your jam, really feels like this game was designed to try to make it accessible for any kind of player. I'm not saying every game needs to do every single one of these changes, but odds are, however, if your game is as big as Oathsworn and requires 2 hands to handle, you probably should be looking into how to make sure your game has some of these changes in it. Misses. While there are some nitpicky things, for example, there is a character that probably shouldn't be picked at level 1, rather waiting until halfway through the game, the biggest thing for me that I need to mention is the illusion of choice. You will be making choices throughout the game that could lead you using that path card, A or B, and it may have you interact a little bit differently, but it still has you end up at the same encounter. It reminded me a bit of those times in video games where no matter what you choose, you still end up at the same destination, and that can make a lot of people feeling like their agency was ripped out of their hands. It seems the exact opposite in combat, where you can really mitigate how much randomness affects your choices. I just enjoy everything this game has to offer. I like the system. I want to play through it. I love the creatures you come across. I love that the Oathsworn, they're fun. There are some things I can't even talk about, but there are things I like. For example, I know there's a standee version instead of miniatures. I do know that the guys here, they actually come apart. I really can't show too much. I don't want to do too much as well because I want to keep them together before I actually lose a piece. Because you can buy equipment to change up their arms, what they're holding. So, sometimes if you equip yourself with a hammer, well, guess what? Now your guy's holding a hammer. It has those kinds of things. It really feels like they really want to just add so much to this game impossible. It's just hard for me not to just enjoy my experience. The 21 encounters is a lot. I gotta tell you, it's gonna take some time, especially if you don't pass all of them. But it never felt like I was just trying to reach the end. There are some legacy games that I really didn't like because I didn't feel like it changed things up too much. I was just playing the same game over and over. The way the stories can switch up but are mixed in with the combat, and the way the combat really does change up some of the beasts that you come and deal with. I was there because I wanted to make it to the end, not because oh, thank God I can finish this and review this. They did everything in their power to fix the problems of a campaign game. They didn't just try to make, this is going to be the next big game because we made the most unique system. Or it's going to be, why do people hate this mechanic? Or what can we do so players can actually play through multiple rounds rather than when they start up game again, they feel they have to spend 2 hours doing setup and finding out what they missed. It just feels they did everything they could to make this just as simple as booting up a game console. And that's what is amazing about this. It really feels like it is a game I can sit down and enjoy playing. I'm not playing a setup beforehand. Yes, you're still going to have to schedule get your group together. I don't know how you can ever avoid that. Even in video games, good luck trying to get your raid group together at a good time every week. It just is a game that wants you to play through their story and have fun doing it. You can adjust the game to however you see fit, whether you want a harder or easier game, whether you just want to do combat. Do what you want to do. Have fun in the Deepwood, even though it is the evil, horrible, dark place. You can let me know if you've backed this. Now, I did mention I was very interested in the final choice of the game. Don't put that in the comments. Please, let's keep this spoiler-free as possible. But I'd love to know which Oathsworn you played as and why. What'd you think of them? Did you enjoy them? Are you excited to try someone else out? That's one that I think at the very least shouldn't surprise people too much and that can still go into the game and have fun. I personally, by the way, enjoyed the bear because he replaced my penitent very early on. I won't explain why, but he is used a lot in the story, it turns out. I did a lot of intimidation. Felt good. Let me know all this in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. And of course, if you can, do the usual like, share, subscribe. And if you know someone who may be interested in this game, and odds are there will be, please share this with them. This is a really great campaign game where you will be able to actually, I think it has the best chance of getting through the end compared to maybe some of the other ones. And of course, thank you to all my rollers who support me on Patreon. It really means a lot and it always helps out with everything. But for now, I'm Will, and this has been Roll for Crit.